chime in. Okay, I will try to go a little slower. Yes, so electrification, lowest cost pathway. Seattle already provides us with very clean electricity, and so particularly in Seattle, this is what we need to do for our buildings as well as for our transportation. We need to make sure that we're using those clean sources. So the other huge impact from burning fossil gas is to our public health, and this, I'll be honest, is something that before I got into the specific building space, I personally knew very little about, and I've been quite surprised at how impactful using gas appliances can be. Firstly, there's the question of indoor air quality. Using particularly gas stoves and ovens, we find that those emit dangerous pollutants, including carbon monoxide, particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, lead, and formaldehyde. And all of those pollutants are associated with a number of cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, as well as certain types of cancer. Specifically from gas stoves, UCLA has found that after cooking for just an hour without proper ventilation, the levels of nitrogen oxide from a gas stove and oven exceed both state and federal outdoor air quality standards in more than 90% of homes. Children who are growing up in homes with gas stoves have a 42% higher risk of experiencing asthma. And just to add a little extra to this conversation, which is that we hear a lot of folks saying, well, there are things you can do to help that if you are able to install air filters or vents. Which is true. It's certainly helpful to be able to have proper ventilation, but it doesn't completely solve the problem. We find that people don't use ventilation as long as they should be, or that a lot of homes just aren't outfitted with proper ventilation hoods for their stoves. And that brings us to sort of the next problem, which is that you're still just venting those pollutants outside. So gas appliances also impact outdoor air quality. The stats that are on this page are about California, but actually in Washington, there's a similar statistic, which is that Washington's buildings release more nitrogen oxide than all of the Washington power plants do. And so, we are seeing, especially in these times when outdoor air pollution has been such a big topic with wildfires and all of those, all the other, forms of pollution that we have from transportation and air travel, that buildings are also really, really contributing to this problem. I think there was a Grist article recently that put a really fine point on it by saying, COVID and wildfires have caused us to stay inside our homes, and in a way that tries to protect us from the outdoor air quality problem that's arising and the increased risk that we have from COVID. But our buildings might be killing us as well if we aren't able to use all electric appliances. So this brings me to air quality and COVID, which is that the link between pollutants, particularly particulate matter, are that small increases in the long-term exposure of particulate matter 2.5 leads to a large increase in the COVID-19 death rate. And these impacts are more severe for people over the age of 65, similarly to a lot of other COVID impacts. So we're really, this is really an important time to be thinking about this. And as with most pollution and health impacts caused by climate and environmental degradation, we see that these impacts are felt disproportionately by communities of color and low-income communities. As you're probably familiar, segregation and redlining have led Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, particularly Black communities, to be pushed to live in parts of cities where there is already greater exposure to air pollution, and that is certainly true in Seattle. I'm not going to remember the exact statistic, but a study on air pollution in Georgetown and South Park showed that exposure both in terms of being close to the highway and industrial pollution is so much stronger there, and I think that's something that a lot of folks are familiar with. In general, Black, Latinx, and Asian people, as well as people with lower socioeconomic status, have higher risks of premature death from particle pollution. And of course, all of the other social determinants of health that are more impactful for vulnerable communities, such as lack of access to healthcare, jobs, grocery stores, all of those, even make these impacts even stronger. Also want to note here that in terms of buildings specifically, a lot of the older homes or homes that have improper ventilation or other issues in terms of buildings and health are also, more likely to be housing people of color or low-income folks. Another thing that is related here is safety. We are running gas through highly pressurized pipelines, transmission pipelines across the country, and then slightly lower pressure, but still pressurized pipelines straight to our homes in terms of distribution. And that sort of leaves us at risk all the time of potential leaks or explosions. The city of Seattle has a publicly searchable database of 911 calls, and we found that they have a 911 call every 3 days, average, reporting a natural gas odor or gas leak. And the big thing to note here is that usually when you have a gas leak or suspect you have a gas leak, I'm sorry, was there a question there? Okay, sorry, thought I heard something. When you suspect a gas leak, you are usually encouraged to call your service provider first. If you're in Seattle, PSC. So we don't even know how many calls PSC is getting. These are just from folks who for whatever reason, decided to call emergency services. So that's obvious, of course, not only a drain on our city resources, but also shows you how close we always are to the kinds of disasters that happened in Greenwood or in Ballard in terms of a gas leak earlier this year. And here in the Pacific Northwest, earthquake risk makes us particularly vulnerable to this because earthquakes, after an earthquake, we run a high risk of those pipelines exploding and causing fires and immediate damage. All electric buildings are also more resilient following natural disasters because electricity can be restored more quickly than repairs can be made to ruptured gas lines. There's, for folks who think about the way that things are restored, because a lot of in homes that use gas, because pilot lights and other mechanisms that help to turn on the gas appliances are already electric. There's already problems with when you're trying to recover after a disaster. If you have electricity go out, you don't have a benefit from having gas. So there's benefit one way, but not the other way. So to talk about some of the plus sides of electricity rather than just the negatives of gas, want to talk a little bit about jobs and cost savings. So in terms of jobs, studies in California have shown that moving to an all-electric building sector would create about 100,000 annual new positions. And sorry, I should say not just new positions, that's a net increase of jobs. So that includes potential job losses. And because California does not have a gas extraction industry, we would likely see lower job losses and higher net benefits. Moving to renewable energy for trades that work in electricity and electric hookups, this is all ripe territory to create jobs and to create employment. So apologies, I didn't get a full chance to update this, I realized, because this graph is showing Oakland, but we have some updated cost saving numbers as well. The Rocky Mountain Institute really recently updated a study that they had done on the costs of residential building electrification, and they included Seattle in that. So we have some new specific numbers, and their study shows that upfront costs of electric heating systems are $4,500 lower than gas, and life cycle costs over 15 years are also lower. That's in part because electric heat pumps, which is the primary technology to replace gas heating, uses highly efficient electricity to move air instead of generating heat, to move hot air around. And that means that heat pumps provide air conditioning as well as heating. And especially, I grew up in the Northwest and have never had air conditioning in my home. But especially this year, I've been even more aware of how important that is and how air conditioning is going to be an essential part of adapting to climate impacts for our region. Not just because of the rises in temperature, but also because of smoke. The most sort of miserable part of the summer for me this year was the week of smoke when I couldn't have my windows open. And it was also really hot. So having that air conditioning benefit is a health adaptation as well. And it's much cheaper and more efficient to do that with an electric heat pump system.
Deepa, excuse me.
Yes.
Can I ask you, when you say upfront costs, what does upfront mean? Does that mean installation? Or?
Yeah, capital costs of, so the way the study framed it with their methodology is the capital costs, and I think they are including air conditioning in this, of building a home with a gas furnace, gas cooking, electric lighting, of course, but gas water heating and gas air conditioning is $4,500 higher than the same building with all electric systems.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the operating costs are incorporated into that life cycle number, which I believe the life cycle cost savings was $4,300 over 15 years. Electricity is currently slightly more expensive than gas in Washington. We do expect to see that go down as more and more customers get on electricity. That will both, as this bullet says, that will create more stable energy prices as we reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Another sort of wonky, interesting thing about the heat pump technology is that sort of like electric vehicles, heat pump water heaters, particularly for washing machines, can act as batteries as we shift to a more renewable energy mix as well. And so they can provide more stability to the grid. And overall, we can start seeing, a lot of benefits for customers on the grid.
Hey, excuse me, can everyone please mute themselves? There's some background, someone's got some noise in the background. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm still hearing a little background noise. Is that just me?
Yeah. No, I'm hearing it too.
Okay, seems to be gone now. Yeah. Okay. So part of the reason that we are but we feel this is really urgent is because buildings have such a long life cycle. They buildings last us at least 50 years if built properly, and if we don't start to make this transition now with new construction, then we will have to bear the burden of retrofits down the road. And the people who are the most likely to be left on those old gas houses are folks who are low-income renters, communities of color. And so not only will they still be living in houses that have these, the health impacts of using indoor gas appliances, but they will also be the few who are left on the gas system. And so their utility bills will go up. And so we want to make sure that we are making this transition now and that we are making this transition equitably to, for instance, we want to make sure that affordable housing is built now with all electric power. And another benefit of that is that under the Clean Energy Transformation Act, utility customers who are on electricity are eligible for utility assistance to pay their bills based on hardship or need, and that protection is not there for gas customers. So there's so many reasons why we need to do this for our most vulnerable residents. So getting on to the solutions part. I'm actually going to skip this because I have more specific slides for this talk. But I just want to mention again that this trend is already starting. There's a movement happening. Berkeley was the first city to pass a building electrification ordinance last year, and within months, so many other cities within California followed suit, and now there are 35 cities who have passed partial or full electrification bills in California. So part of our strategy here in Washington is to try to, start a row of dominoes by having cities take on these kinds of policies and target that at the local level and then also at the state level as well. We also have a number of other states who are just looking in general at how to phase out the use of gas, including New Jersey, Massachusetts, and New York. The problem is there's a massive PR campaign that's already started by the gas industry. Here in the Northwest, we have the Partnership for Energy Progress, as they're called, which is largely funded by the gas utilities, including PSE, Cascade Natural Gas. And so they are, running ads. I believe there are some ads on metro buses in Seattle right now talking about, reliable, affordable natural gas. And there's this fascinating Mother Jones article on how the gas industry is paying influencers on Instagrams to talk about how much they love their gas stoves. You may have seen a Stranger article earlier this year about how PSE came out with a coloring book for kids to, learn how natural gas comes to their homes. And so there's this real effort to make the case that gas is what people like and what people prefer, particularly around this question of gas stoves, because I don't think most people have a preference on where their heating comes from, other than that they would like to have it cost as little as possible. But we, are really battling hard against this PR campaign, against this greenwashing of gas that both focuses on what people like about gas and focuses on the idea of renewable natural gas, which I can get into that a little bit if people would like. But the short story there is that there are some uses for what is known as renewable natural gas, which is mostly capture off of biomethane. We don't believe those uses are best in buildings. There are other sectors, particularly in industry or in some forms of transportation, where that might make more sense because the technology isn't there to switch over to a renewable or clean source. But heat pump technology, electric heat pump technology, and electric induction stoves are so highly efficient and getting to be more and more affordable. So that in buildings we really don't need to use those limited resources here. Okay, so I will stop there briefly before I get into specifics for what's happening in Seattle, just to see if anyone has questions on the information that I've shared, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about the policy realm.
This looks familiar to me. I think you used this presentation before, is that right?
Yes, I did come from that presentation.
And is it something you can share by sending either a link or
Absolutely.
an attachment to an email, and it can be distributed to people?
Yes. So we had this buildings webinar in August. I can send you the link to the full set of slides from that. I cut a few from here just for time. And also there's a recording of the webinar, which went over similar information, but did delve deeper into that health message. We were able to have Dr. Andy Krasner, who helped author a report on gas stoves and the impacts to indoor air pollution, who gave a really great description of the risks there. So if folks weren't able to make that webinar and want to listen to the recording, I will share both of those.
That would be good.
I had a question about when you were talking about the back in the, oh, here we are.
Yeah, sorry, I can share again if you'd like, but
no.
It was nice to see all your faces for a little.
Thank you. So back in the gas is bad part of your presentation, my understanding is that when gas is transported through pipelines, the way it has to be a certain pressure in order to move, and it's kind of crude. There are ways of controlling the pressure. There are compressor stations to make it more pressurized, but if they need to reduce the pressure, they just vent it. And yes. It's basically putting methane into the atmosphere. And in fact, my understanding is one of the reasons, there's a zillion reasons why fracking is bad, but one of them is because from the fracking sites to get the gas to any place where it's used, it goes long distances, and a huge amount of it is vented.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't really talk about fracking, but happy to touch on that a little bit. So, you know, in Washington, we don't have any fracking sites within our state. Same is true in Oregon. In fact, I think there's a statewide moratorium on fracking within the state, but that doesn't mean that we aren't consuming fracked gas. Most of Puget Sound Energy's gas, I think half of it comes from British Columbia and Alberta, and the other half comes from Rocky Mountain states. That's primarily fracked gas. And yeah, Elizabeth, just as you were mentioning, it's known as natural gas flaring. And it is the methods that is used to release pressure on those pipelines. And that has all sorts of horrible health impacts, including, I think there was a study that showed that babies who are born within that region are, I don't remember the exact statistic, but much more likely to be born prematurely because of the impacts of that flaring. And that's, you know, not even considering the risks of higher methane leaks. Those are the planned ones, you know, so fracking, yeah, absolutely very dangerous.
Thank you. And then I'm sorry, I have another question. I'm particularly interested in what you said about renewable natural gas. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Port of Seattle is trumpeting that they have met their climate goals 10 years early because they just signed a 10-year contract for so-called renewable natural gas, which is definitely coming from out of state because all of Washington State's renewable natural gas was bought by California. And so I'm very interested to know, you're saying that we have really good ways of electrifying buildings. And could you just repeat what you said that renewable natural gas should be used as?
Yeah. So, you know, the sources of renewable natural gas are pretty limited, right? They're from landfills, they're from, you know, biomethane. But so we believe that those should be used most strategically in the sectors that need them. And I do apologize, I'm a little less familiar with what sectors they are the most useful in. I know that some industrial processes, for example, that have to get to very high heat, you know, renewable natural gas can be helpful there in a way that we don't have the technology for electricity to get us there. But buildings, we don't have those problems. Residential and commercial buildings, we know how to heat and power our homes and our businesses just using electricity, and it's getting affordable and cheap, and you know, heat pump technology has been around for decades, and it's only now getting affordable enough for people to consider using it in their homes. But we don't need renewable natural gas here, and we could use it other places. And there's not enough of it to entirely power any of these industries anyway.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions, if it's okay. I was just wondering, when you look at coal versus natural gas and include the estimates of all the leakage that occurs from pulling it out of the ground to delivery, if Climate Solutions has a particular number they like to use for the amount that's leaked, or how you do that comparison, because certainly there's a widespread belief that moving to natural gas is much cleaner, and it's not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Climate Solutions has, you know, worked on the Power Pass Coal, as I'm sure many of you did as well, Power Pass Coal campaign within Washington, and particularly after Washington passed the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which, you know, essentially means that we're not going to be using coal-fired electricity sources anytime. You know, we're going to be phasing those out as well. So I actually don't have comparison numbers between coal and gas that way. I think at this point, you know, we do hear this argument about gas versus coal. I think what's most strategic for us to do in terms of messaging is to not have those be the points of comparison anymore. Coal, we know that coal is bad. We now need to be talking about how electricity is better than gas. So I would be happy to try to dig up some numbers for you, but I don't have them off the top of my head.
Thanks. And the other question is, it was either last year or the year before in the Washington State Legislature, they tried to pass the bill that had to do with estimating the losses of methane associated with pulling it out of the ground and delivering it. That didn't go anywhere. Do you know if there's any plan to reintroduce that?
I have not heard about that coming back. I will talk a little bit about what we know is coming at the state level. It's also a challenging year, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Both I think the House has announced that they're doing an all online session, but they haven't announced what that'll look like and what testimony will be like, how many bills they're going to allow when you have an all online session. The Senate is still saying that they'll do a hybrid session, but again, it's very difficult to imagine what that'll look like. So it's going to be a strange year.
Thank you.
2021. Yeah. Any other questions on sort of this case for building electrification? I can then, if not, I can move on into the sort of policy solutions. Great. Also, I did want to note that this policy work that we're doing, we do in partnership with a number of other organizations. One of them is stand.earth, and actually Ingrid Archibald, who is the field organizer for Stand locally, is going to join this call as well, and I think she'll share a few slides as well. I think she'll be on it in just a few minutes, so I'll go ahead and start my policy slides while she gets on. Okay, so in terms of upcoming policy to try to move us towards all electric buildings, the nearest term thing that we have is the City of Seattle is doing a scheduled update to their commercial energy code. And this gets pretty wonky and doesn't sound very exciting, but it is actually a sort of a big win in terms of limiting fossil fuel use, because the updates that the city has already proposed, that the Department of Construction and Inspections have already proposed, are basically eliminating fossil fuel uses in new commercial buildings. And that includes large multifamily buildings, which are, I think, buildings over 5 floors are classified as commercial in the zoning. So that is something that we hope will pass early next year. And the amendment language only specifies space heating and water heating, but again, because this is all for new buildings, it's pretty unlikely that if a building has to be built without gas for space or water heating, that it would be hooked up just for cooking. And so, that's something that we definitely are trying to let people know about, especially because, we would love to see advocacy around that. But it's also a process that the city is already undertaking and that we believe will go to council in November or December this year. But hopefully should be a fairly straightforward thing to pass through. Of course, it's been a weird year. Following city politics this year has been one of the strangest. So the things that seem straightforward may not always be. And, I would be happy to give PCA updates on that as we get closer to when there's a space for public comment on that. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I've been working along with Robin on a group that is working with Seattle Public Schools. So probably you've heard about this before. But I think, again, as sort of an incremental piece to get parts of Seattle's government to make these changes is really helpful, particularly because this issue of building electrification came up last year and had a bit of a bumpy process. So I'm really excited about the ways in which we can start making these changes in pieces, and then look towards bringing back a full building electrification policy in Seattle as well. Other encouraging things that happened on this front were the Jumpstart legislation that created funding for affordable housing, which mandated that those units, the units built with Jumpstart dollars, had to be all electric. So we're definitely seeing more of an appetite for that in Seattle. I didn't put this on the slide, but we, along with Stand.Earth and some other groups, have also been working with a number of other jurisdictions in Washington to try and pass ordinances around building electrification. The places that are sort of the hotspots right now are Bellingham, Olympia, and Tacoma and Issaquah. And so I, was focusing most of my talk today on Seattle, but I was excited to see, I think Sarah is here from PCA Kirkland. Would love to connect with folks on the east side, because we've been working a little bit with PCA Issaquah around work there, and Redmond and Bellevue also might be likely candidates for cities that might be interested in taking action on this. But I'm less familiar with Kirkland, so would love to connect on that. And then statewide, The main bill that we expect to come back is was introduced in session this year, 2020, as House Bill 2586, which was a home heating electrification bill. Essentially, what this bill does is it gives public utilities the authority to implement a beneficial electrification plan, which essentially means that they would be able to provide incentives to people who want to switch from oil or gas to electric systems. Currently, they are restricted from doing that, or currently the authority to do that is somewhat murky. And so this bill would clarify that authority of public utilities to do that. It would only be for customers who choose to do that, and it would only be for utilities who choose to put that plan in place. But we saw a lot of opposition to it from PSE this year and from other gas providers. So that's definitely something that we're going to be fighting for. A couple other things that might be folded into perhaps a larger gas package at the state level are there are several statutory references to gas that basically say that residents of Washington have a right to affordable gas. We want to remove those references and instead say affordable energy or something like that. There's no reason that gas should be singled out as preferable. So we want to make that clear in statute. And there's also a number of tax exemptions that are currently in place for folks who use gas. I think one of the sort of absurd ones that came up is that using gas to heat a chicken coop offers you a tax exemption. So we want to make sure, again, that there's no incentivization to use gas, and hopefully removing some of these exemptions will also maybe bring the state in a little bit of revenue. And then the final thing is that PSE in particular has really wants to limit the authority of cities and towns to restrict gas. It makes sense from a strategic point of view, but they want that to be a permanent moratorium that they enshrine in state law. And so we hope to defend against that. That's something that came up in a package this year and was approved by Democrats and Republicans, and then that whole package ended up falling apart for different reasons. But we want to make sure that this municipal action can be taken because that authority exists currently. So that was most of what I had as far as slides. And I see that Ingrid is here now, so maybe before questions, Ingrid, if you want to introduce yourself and maybe share some of your slides as well.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ingrid Archibald. I use she and they pronouns, and I work at Stand.Earth, which is also an environmental nonprofit. We're mostly based in Bellingham, but I, like you all, live on Duwamish land here in Seattle. I'm really sorry that I'm late. I had another Zoom call before this, but I'm happy that I could join for at least the little end of this. I don't really feel like I need to share slides, and I don't want to take up too much time because I would really love to have time for questions and for y'all to be able to respond, especially to what Deepa was just going through. But I'll just really quickly talk about the work that I do at Stand and how it overlaps with the content that Deepa just shared with you all. So I specifically am a field organizer at Stand, and I work on our Safe Cities campaign. So SAFE stands for Standing Against Fossil Fuel Expansion, and it's the grassroots movement of jurisdictions, of communities who are working to pass local ordinances and laws that restrict the expansion or end the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. I'm sure that you all are on board that we should stop. There is no need to build out. There's no need to expand. We need to scale back as quickly and justly as we can. And yet fossil fuel companies are still, proposing project after project, expansion after expansion. And even in states like Washington, this continues to be a fight that we're in. So y'all might know about like the Cherry Point moratorium up in Whatcom County. They've been renewing a 6-month interim moratorium since 2016, but it's limited, the expansion of Cherry Point, and that similar move has been made now in other jurisdictions across Washington, and that's really the impetus and the inspiration of the Safe Cities movement. It's this idea that communities and cities and counties really do have the power to, tighten controls on what the fossil fuel industry can do, and in their plans to expand, really put a limit and a stop to that. So that's what Safe Cities is all about. And that includes this idea of building for the clean energy future, building decarbonized all electric buildings. Because as I'm sure Deepa mentioned, buildings are a huge source of climate pollution, including here in Washington state. And it's really time for us to, build buildings that are safe, clean, and carbon neutral, carbon free. So that is part of what we're working on, and it's been really wonderful to get to work with Climate Solutions, doing outreach to different communities across the state, talking to different legislators, and figuring out ways that we can spark a movement here in Washington to make it really normal that we're going to move beyond buildings that are hooked up to gas, and to really get the ball rolling on making sure that the buildings that we're building are electric and prepared for the clean energy future. So we're really working in a few different places. Hopefully Bellingham will be the first city to pass an ordinance of this kind. So that's where my organizing is really right now. But I'm really excited to work with groups like yourselves to make sure that we're, doing everything we can here in Seattle and beyond to stand up against the fossil fuel industry and make sure that we're limiting growth so that we can really open the door to expanding clean energy, renewable energy as quickly as possible. So that's what we're doing. And yeah, I'll stop so that there's time for some conversation.
Jan, go ahead.
I just wonder if either or both of you could talk a bit about the no side and the yes side of this particular thing. Because we can say we really want building electrification. We can also say no new gas hookups. And my observation is that in the climate space, it's a different kind of energy that you tap into when you're saying, no, this has to stop. And it's a different kind of energy when you're coming to your city and you say, we appreciate what you're doing and you need to do more of this, you need to do more of that. So I wonder if you could just talk about reasons in some situations to use the message of we need great electric buildings, and other situations where you might use the message of no new gas hookups. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, and Ingrid, I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. I think what we've been finding is, both operating within those climate spaces and outside those climate spaces. I think that the yes message is working better for us, in part because this is an issue that not everyone is super plugged into, even if you are really involved in climate action. That thinking about the benefits of moving towards electric, and especially building off of those wins that our movement has already had in Washington. I think the Clean Energy Transformation Act really was such not only a powerful win policy-wise, but a really big movement that came together around that, around what could have been seen by a lot of people as kind of an esoteric utility-based policy, but it's been so impactful. And so really making sure that we talk about this as the next step after that, I think is powerful. And I think it also gets at that question, I'm sorry, I don't remember who actually asked it, but about coal versus gas, and about how folks, that was you, yes, about how gas is, folks talk about the benefits of gas, and talking about, framing electricity and electric sources and electric heat pumps as positives, I think takes that argument, undercuts that argument a little bit, that, gas is at least better than coal. So that's my take on it. And that's, we've been testing different messages, whether it's building electrification or building decarbonization, to try to see, what resonates the most with people. But I think what we're finding is that the idea of a ban on gas is scary to talk about. And so for folks who aren't super looped in, and that shuts the door for some people. So trying to stay away from that personally. But Ingrid, I would love to hear your take too.
David, do you have a comment?
He wants you to go ahead, I think.
Oh, okay.
His question.
Okay. This is something that I really struggle with, at least personally. because I'm a very positive and optimistic person, but I really want to call out the thing that's bad. For some reason, that's really my tendency. So especially with this issue, where I think that folks can recognize, like, okay, I can understand why hooking up buildings to gas, which explodes, and which pollutes our air, which contributes to climate change, like those are all bad things. And if you can tell folks that, then it really makes sense that we shouldn't be building with gas hookups anymore. And similarly, people don't know that electric buildings are great. Like, that doesn't really resonate with people. You know, this idea of all electric buildings isn't super inspirational or uplifting. I feel like most people just don't know what that means. So I think it really just comes down to making sure that we're explaining what the problem is, so that then when we deliver the solution, it really makes sense and it clicks. And I think that part of that, unfortunately, is having to point to the fact that gas is bad for a multitude of reasons. And that's the negative part. But then I think where the positive language comes in is in getting at why we're doing this. You know, we're doing this for a livable future. We're doing this so that we're not poisoning our air. We're doing this so that lower income folks aren't stuck paying the bill. There's all of these reasons that we need to electrify our buildings. And so I think getting more at the vision and the mission of that, and using that as our uplifting language, is really critical. And in general, people don't like bans, so we're not going to call them gas bans. And I think that using consistent language in terms of what we're calling what we're doing, whether that's building electrification or building decarbonization, as opposed to gas bans, I think that piece is definitely really critical. But being able to explain what the problem is and then give a really clear vision of what the solution is a hard line to walk. But I also think that it depends on the audience, like you were saying, Jan, which it just depends. Like, I'm going to speak differently about it to a group of folks who I know are climate activists than I would a room full of people who, for whom climate isn't their top issue.
Yes, thank you. You know, I'm a PSE customer. I live in PSE territory, and it just makes my blood boil. And mostly I'm working on the side where I'm going to the city and encouraging them to do the positive things. But yeah, PSE just makes my blood boil. So just acknowledging those two sides.
David,
So
you're muted. David, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Behaving myself. Now, okay, thank you. Thank you both for coming tonight. This is great stuff. I've heard some of it before, but it's always great to hear again. My focus is on Seattle, and my question is around what I'm calling collaborative advocacy. That is, Deepa, you listed the energy code update, the schools, and the full building electrification policy. So all it sounds like great stuff. Is there an organized collaborative effort to make these things happen? If so, which agencies are involved? Who are the leaders? Is there a website? How do we get supported? I'm interested in strategy implementation and advocacy where we descend on City Hall in a unified way to make things happen. So how do we do it, and what's going on? Because I'm like the Washington Environmental Council, I'm aware of them at the state level, but is there a Seattle Environmental Council? And what am I missing?
I don't think you're missing anything. I think a lot of these, efforts are, so just a little background for those who may not have been following last year. There was an effort in Seattle to pass an ordinance around building electrification about a year ago. And there was a whole coalition that came together around that, a number of different organizations. Climate Solutions actually only played a very small part. A lot of other organizations took the lead on that. And so I think, if the Healthy Homes, Healthy Buildings bill comes back, then we'd certainly want to see sort of a bigger coalition. But at the moment, sort of the things that I had mentioned are kind of different organizations leading different parts of that. So for instance, the commercial code update is being led by the Northwest Energy Coalition, and the Seattle Public Schools effort is being led by the Sierra Club. And Climate Solutions and Stand are doing some of this work outside of Seattle where we're focusing. But all of that to say that I think we've found that to be helpful in terms of partnership building, especially with different groups being at different capacities. During COVID, but also because of how big our climate crisis is, and because there's so many different dimensions to it, we're trying to figure out how to be nimble and how to be proactive and reach the groups who are able to be involved. So I feel really committed to when we have this upswell going in Seattle again, to having what you're talking about, having resources for people who want to get involved, and making sure that those are available through a coalition. We are not at that point quite yet in Seattle, but I would love to work with PCA to get us there, and would love to have. Also, I want to say I'm also the policy person, not the field person, and that's really Ingrid's expertise. So feel free to negate anything that I just said, Ingrid.
I'll just add, definitely not negate anything. I'll just add that we're both part of a coalition that is made up of a bunch of different stakeholders and environmental groups from across the state called Shift Zero, that is purely working on the movement for building electrification here in Washington. So it's a state-based movement. And we have folks working in local jurisdictions as well as on statewide policy. So in that coalition, we're working on these different levels there. And if anybody is interested in joining, we have a local policy team. So if folks are interested in being part of that or being plugged in, you should definitely let me know. But we'll have a website soon. I don't think that their website is ready yet, but there will be a website with a bunch of information and really helpful resources that is currently being developed. So that will be really helpful once they have that ready to go and once it's been launched.
So this is just my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for the others. I think if you have an issue and then build a coalition, you're doing it backwards. We need to be proactive and have this coalition built now that builds an agenda and goes forward, rather than assembling a coalition every time we have an issue. I don't know what, with all the talent in Seattle, I don't know why we're not organizing and descending on the city. So much that needs to be done, but rather than just have an issue and then, oh yeah, we need to organize now. I know you're not responsible for that, but it drives me crazy. I wish we had an organized effort and an agenda and a strategy and really focused. That's just my personal opinion. I'm looking for that, so thank you.
Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about electrification of existing buildings. And I know that's a step beyond where you're, spending most of your time now. But I was wondering if you've thought at all about what sort of policies might work for that and how we might start kind of chopping that around.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in our, at least in Climate Solutions playbook right now, the first step is that home heating electrification bill at the state level, because the easiest way to try to encourage retrofits is to be able to provide public assistance for them, and that authority is unclear right now. Essentially, there's a lot of sort of legal wonkiness, but public utilities are not allowed to provide incentives for conservation purposes. So because of that, a lot of public utilities will interpret that as not being able to provide incentives to fuel switch or to retrofit. And so that's the first step that we need to get that authority for those utilities. And then Seattle, then that's when we can start working on Seattle City Light, for instance. To Seattle City Light just passed City Council just passed a transportation electrification bill that gives Seattle City Light the authority to fund electrification infrastructure for vehicles. If we're able to get this home heating electrification bill passed, we could see something similar for buildings and be able to really push for that. So I think that's what we're seeing as the first step to make sure that the cities that want to do this now and can't do it are able to do it. And then we can start working on the cities that aren't even there yet.
And you have a sponsor for that bill? It's gonna come up this spring, it sounds like, maybe?
Yep, it's Representative Rammel,
Great.
Alex Rammel. So
Thanks.
Oh, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I mean, I think that's a very important bill for us to advocate for. And you know, it's amazing that the PSE and the other gas sellers got it embedded in the Constitution. You can't use conservation funds for fuel switching. So there's going to be a pot of money if this goes through that's not called conservation, but you had another term for it. I'm just wondering, I know that bill didn't go beyond the first committee that it reached last session. I wonder if if we see signs that there's going to be broader support. And I wondered also if like Seattle City Council has a legislative agenda that, you know, and if that's part of it, and
yes,
be part of it.
Yeah. So we are actually putting together right now a one-pager on climate solutions recommendations for cities for the legislative agenda, and we've been sharing those. I've been in a number of meetings with council members recently, and have been sharing those with them. So I'm hopeful that it will get on their legislative agenda. Certainly, there are so many issues coming up that are related to climate next session that I hope that this will make it in there, along with things like clean fuel standard and transportation funding and potential carbon pricing. But yes, we've been pushing for that. I don't know yet whether Seattle has taken that up yet. And I think most cities are still crafting their agendas, and they'll likely have them out mid-November to their lobbyists.
I had a question, Deepa. The last item that you talked about on the statewide stuff. Did I hear you correctly? Did you say that there was a bill proposing a permanent moratorium on the authority of cities and towns to restrict gas, and that it had bipartisan support? Like,
so yeah, I should be clear about that. So the bill wasn't aimed at that. It was attached onto a bill that had bipartisan support. There was a bill this session that was an update to the Clean Air Act that it would have afforded Governor Inslee authority to implement a small-scale cap-and-trade program through executive order. And to get bipartisan support on that, they attached this rider that would have put. I think in this year's it wasn't a permanent moratorium. I think it was a multi-year moratorium. But PSC is pushing for a permanent moratorium, to be clear. And so, it's possible, we know that will come back in some form. It's possible it may not come back in the permanent moratorium form, but that's what we want to be defending against. And that's, one of the cases that we've been making to the elected officials in the cities that we're working with, that, if cities start to pass these policies, before or during session, that helps us make the case that cities need to retain this authority. But yeah, do want to be clear, that wasn't the entire intent of that bill, but it was, it did make it out of committee with that rider added in, and that package, sort of fell apart for other reasons, not because of that piece. Yeah, so it is something to watch out for.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. How important, or how much a part of what you think needs to be done is like public education, developing a greater political will. I mean, among in the community, as well as our electeds. And yeah, is anything happening with that? And what do you think about that?
Yeah.
Well, either of you, really.
Ingrid, do you want to take that first?
No,
Do you have to go? Also, sorry. Okay, sure. Yeah, I think it's a crucial piece, and I hope that gatherings like this can be part of that. I hope that that some of you who are interested will be able to take this and spread it to your networks as well. You know, we Climate Solutions tend to focus really on the policy side. And so a lot of our education efforts really have been around grass tops and elected officials and other environmental groups rather than sort of a broader public education campaign. But Shift Zero, the coalition that Ingrid mentioned, you know, that has a lot of groups that are trying to work on this on a larger scale, including communications groups and research groups that are doing polling and those kinds of things. And so, yes, I think it's a yes and kind of answer that we're doing that within our spheres, but as much as can be done, you know, outside as well. I at least feel like I've been seeing, you know, positive media around this, and we certainly do media engagement to try to get out the word. One of the things, you know, we're trying to highlight is the gas industry is focusing on gas stoves. Can we try to, you know, talk about the benefits of induction and try to, you know, talk about how there are other options for what people want, or the benefits of heat pumps and all of those things. So I'm not sure if that's really a solid answer to your question, but that's sort of my take on it. And I do think the education piece is crucial.
I put a note in the chat. If you want to see what the bill looked like this year, you can go on legwa.gov.
Yes, so that's the home heating electrification bill. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get lots of information, but never got out of committee, so it's not a live bill. It would be reintroduced under a new number next year.
Yes.
So I have a naive question. I'm sorry to say I still get paper bills from Seattle City Light. So every 2 months, they put an insert in. It's a two-sided piece of paper with, you know, like this, the most recent one is telling you, hey, if you take a hot bath, you're actually using a lot of electricity. So they're encouraging people like not to take baths. And I would be happier if they encouraged people to get heat pumps, but can they not do that?
Right.
I mean, oh.
That's my understanding right now, is that because of these restrictions, well, I mean, I don't know if they have a restriction on that in terms of messaging, but they can't incentivize it. So I guess they can't, because switching your system from a gas system to a heat pump system would be expensive. They probably feel that, you know, what's the point of telling people to do it without being able to provide them some assistance? That would be my guess. But they can't provide that incentive right now. That financial incentive.
I guess I'm just saying that they're doing some education here,
right?
But it seems to me they could be doing more important education.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and you know, these it's interesting, even the sort of politicization that has come out of, for instance, the home heating electrification bill being introduced this year. So prior to that, PSC actually offered, so, you know, PSC is not a public utility. They can do whatever they want as far as incentives. They used to offer an incentive to switch to a heat pump system in Seattle, where not in Seattle, in areas where they provide both gas and electricity, right? In say the east side. And after this bill was introduced this year, they removed that financial incentive. And so, yeah, a lot of this is just, you know, sort of political game that is happening around what utilities are able to do, but also what they see as politically feasible to do.
Well, we have to fight against them in the legislature. I mean, that's where the whole hangup is. Even if the cities were able to get some incentives, they'd be overruled by the bill,
exactly.
the rules that they have to comply with.
Exactly. I want to be respectful of your time as well, because I know it's 8:30 and that you, I believe, have more on your agenda. So if there are any final questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but I just wanted to note that.
I'm just wondering what
Oh, Cindy, you muted.
Unmuted myself and then muted myself again. Anyway, I'm just wondering for either or both of you, if you have any image at this point. It's okay if you don't. We can develop it as we go along. But of where you would see the next steps of collaborating and working together, of looking at these things, and how, if you just have thoughts about that, if you know yet, or if this is it for now. I mean, coming here.
I think I would say, you know, as I mentioned, some of the things that are coming up in Seattle are a little bit less exciting than a full building electrification ordinance, but to us they are pretty crucial because they will be impactful in this fight. And so, for instance, I would, you know, love to have PCA support on the commercial energy code update when that goes to council, and would love to check in with you all to let you know, to give you updates on that. Not, you know, probably won't need to be as long as this, but maybe I could show up at your next meeting to tell you, you know, what's going on at that, just for a 5-minute update, to see how you all would like to be involved. And as Ingrid mentioned, if any of you are interested in sort of getting more involved and being part of the Shift Zero local policy team, which Ingrid co-chairs, then that, you know, that is all, of course, a way to collaborate as well. But I think I want to throw that back to you all a little bit, because I know you all are exploring all the different options for what you want to be involved in, and we of course respect that, but want to plug in on the areas that are, you know, of interest to you all.
Could you put your email in the chat, please?
Yes, I can.
I think we really want to help. So the more more specific you can be about legislation, hearings, talking points, anything we want to be helpful. So please let us know.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I guess I'd say I think the commercial building code is going to be really important. And if we can get some folks to go and comment in city council when that comes up, because I know at the last meeting, I have a friend who's been going and she's been commenting, and she missed one meeting. And apparently there weren't any climate people at that meeting, but there were like 15 people who were all builders saying this is horrible. So,
I was on that meeting. Yeah, that was one of those highly technical meetings, and it was a little bit complicated. There weren't actually any gas people saying this is horrible. It was mostly builders sort of talking about the ways that this would be challenging to implement in the near term. So yeah. I didn't see it as totally hopeless, but yes, to your point, I
sorry,
agree.
I didn't mean to apply it was hopeless. I just meant to say it's really important,
yes,
you know, when this comes up in city council, that there be people speaking in support of it, because we know right now that there's going to be people speaking against it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right there.
It seems like we've talked a little bit about education. It seems like some of the education might be a little more behind the scenes for pipe fitters to understand the work that's available, that will be available, even if they're not hooking up gas pipeline, that there's a whole lot of work, so that the unions don't just sort of knee-jerk, you know, have a negative reaction to some of this idea of electrification.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a complicated topic with pipe fitters, because there certainly are pipe fitter jobs that specialize in these gas hookups that aren't exactly transferable. You know, the pipe fitters union has multiple trades beneath it. I think there's at least 8 or 10. And so, and because other labor groups tend to sort of default to supporting the most impacted union, the conversation so far with pipe fitters have certainly been challenging. I don't know that education is necessarily the problem there.
Well, maybe
yeah.
Maybe there could be some development of what it means to have a just transition for a pipe fitter who currently hooks up gas pipelines.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that one thing that came out of last year was that the city of Seattle is supposed to be putting together a jobs report on this specifically. That was a demand that came out of the Healthy Homes, Healthy Buildings process last year. And so we're on the lookout for that, and we're pushing, you know, the city to make sure that they complete that report for those conversations.
I'd love, if possible, just add on to the question about next steps. So yeah, DEPA is going to be following all of the commercial energy codes, which is not my purview. So that will be wonderful to get all the updates from her on that. But hopefully, I just really hope that we'll have a solid ordinance passed in Bellingham within the next couple of months. And coming out of that, I think we'll have a lot of lessons learned. Bellingham is in a similar position to Seattle here, where I know that, you know, this group specifically is working on implementing recommendations, right? And making sure that our cities are actually taking these steps to pass policy that, you know, climate task forces are telling folks to pass. And so I think that we're going to get a lot of, gain some wisdom from the experience that we'll have here in Bellingham, that will hopefully be transferable to what we can do together here in Seattle. So I'm excited for that, and looking to next year, hoping to pass, you know, an exciting building electrification policy in Seattle. We'll be able to hopefully work together to figure out what that kind of campaign and grassroots will look like around that. And I'm definitely happy, and I know that Climate Solutions is really happy to continue working with y'all on what comes next after the energy code updates. Yeah, so that's just what I wanted to add in there.
Any other questions? If not, I want to thank you both sincerely for spending this evening with us. We really appreciate your work and appreciate you coming to tell us about it.
Yeah, and thank you all so much for the hard work that you're doing in your spare time to push for climate progress and climate justice in Seattle. So really appreciate it, and it's great to meet you all.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Good night.
I now have a 1 gig file of this video and audio. Anybody want to offer their email as a one gig?
Bill, I think that since the coalition has been able to put things up on their website, they should be able to deal with this one too. Am I right, Jan?
Oops, Jan's.
Yes, what you need to do is, you know, like put it on YouTube or something and link to it. So we don't actually put it on the same server that our website comes from. We're not a streaming service. So, but you can, if you have the recording available in some way by a way of a link, then you can post a link.
Bill, you're muted.
Well, I wonder, I mean, maybe we can get, if Deepa sends us the link to the webinar, maybe we can use that, and then Bill doesn't have to keep that all like use
That
up.
sounds good. I didn't even know they had a recording of that. I had only seen the slides, so I'm glad to know about that.
Yeah, so if we, yeah, so then anyway, we could find out about that, and then Bill doesn't have to hang on to such a huge file.
Jan, the webinar link was on Climate Solutions website.
I just hadn't found it. I'd looked for it, and
okay.
I'd only found the slides. I'm not saying it wasn't there. I'm just saying
Okay.
I hadn't found it.
Sorry, I'm getting organized here. So are you folks ready to move on with just PCA Seattle stuff, or do you want to do any kind of summary or what next steps about that stuff, about what we just saw? Or should we just go back to our agenda?